Welcome to another episode of Purpose Today. I am your host, Dr. April Dobson, and I'm very excited to have a very special guest on our show today, Karen Taylor. She is a certified rapid transformational therapy practitioner, grief educator, and the CEO and founder of Atmalogy. I am so excited to have our very special guest, Karen Taylor, on our show today. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with a power-packed episode of Purpose Today. Welcome back to Purpose Today. Thank you again for joining us from around the world. It is such a pleasure to have you all joining us on the show today, and I'm excited to welcome our very special guest, Karen Taylor. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and to have this conversation with you all today.
You're very welcome. And so we're going to, jump right into it. I know that you bring a wealth of experience, 23 years of corporate experience, and a transformative journey that you've had personally. And you've done some groundbreaking work to support grief and individuals who are experiencing grief. So can you just share a little bit of information about yourself with our viewers?
Absolutely. So I'm challenging myself. So we're going to see how this goes, because I am really challenging myself to not describe myself with the typical roles and labels that we typically use when we do this. So here we go. So I am a curious explorer of the heart. Just a continuous learner. I love learning. I love challenging myself to learn new things. Witty. I am a nature lover. That's where I think I do my best thinking. I see the best in others. I value authentic connections. So authenticity has really, really become very important to me. I would rather collect experiences than things. And my superpower is helping people connect the dots from their past to their present so they can build the future that they really desire. So what I do is I help women who have experienced loss to heal and to move forward with stability and clarity.
That's awesome. And I really love that. And I love the fact that you said that you also help people to connect the dots and obtain, clarity. And I think, because you've mentioned all those things, it's a great time for us to talk about your business. And I know you're making a major impact with your business, Atmalogy, and just impacting so many people's lives. So can you tell us a little bit more about your company?
Absolutely. So Atmalogy's name, people always ask, what does that mean? It's a name that, I chose very intentionally. I was visiting Nashville like 8 years ago, and I went to this cafe, and it was just this cute workspace. So that had, different rooms you could work in, and they were all decorated kind of, that hobo chick type of vibe. And so I just fell in love with it. And I ended up getting a t-shirt from there, which I never, ever do that. And I'd wear it throughout the years. And on the back of it, on the front, it says Atmalogy. And on the back, it said the study of one's true self.
Wow.
And so as I went through a lot of different experiences in my life, including the death of my sister in 2019, which was the catalyst to all of the transformation and getting me to where I am today. I would see that t-shirt. And as I was going through this journey of trying to process a loss of this magnitude, what ended up happening is I discovered who I was really for the first time in 49 years at that point. I learned who I was. I learned what I wanted in this life. My sister's death opened up this opportunity for me that I did not know that I was going to experience. And so when I realized that it was through my sister's death that I found myself and my purpose, I knew I was supposed to help other people do the same. And so Atmalogy is really the experience that I went through to rediscover who I was. And that has a lot of meaning behind my business.
That's awesome. And I'm glad that you really talked about how what, was a less than desirable experience with, the passing of your sister, how there was a positive side to it, and you having self-discovery, discovering who you were, and discovering your purpose. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that, because you talked about how you came to discover your purpose and have that understanding. How important do you believe it is for every person to discover their purpose and operating within their purpose?
I think it's everything. I think it's what we're all here to do. I believe that we all came here with specific reasons, with very specific, unique superpowers and talents and individual experiences that we all are supposed to learn from, so we can go and help others through that. I really look at the most challenging times that we go through in life can really become the roadmap and survival guide for somebody else who is just starting to navigate that and not sure where to start. For me, I had to go through a couple of years of, trying to understand grief and learning about what didn't work and learning different modalities and taking them all in. And, some were just nice to know, some were life-changing. And so I kind of did that heavy lifting because I saw eventually that that's what I'm here to do is to help others, so they don't have to go through quite that extensive of a confusing journey to find a roadmap. But purpose is everything. And I think once you know your purpose, you know your North Star. And so it immediately gives you the sense of alignment that it's hard to put into words, but people that have found their purpose know exactly what that feeling is. And so once you know what you're here to do, what you want to do and accomplish, then you can get really clear on what your values are, because your values are going to be it's like what sits underneath the purpose and holds it up. Like That's our good. Values carry the purpose forward in our day-to-day actions and our decisions. And then, so there's, another layer of alignment. It's like all these pieces just start clicking into place. It's kind of how I visually see it in my mind. And then the last piece is your purpose then helps you know who you have to be. What's your identity that you have to take on to achieve that? Because the identity that I had when I was in corporate is very different than the identity that I need as the owner of a business. So there was a lot of shifts and untying of knots and old beliefs, limiting beliefs. There was a lot that I had to let go to step into this new version of myself. So it's very much when you get all of those things, purpose, values, and identity in alignment, life starts to feel very easy. Things flow. I think that's the best way to describe it.
That's good. And you said a few things that I want us to, unpack. And one was, with your purpose and discovering your purpose, you were able to start aligning and you saw a shift in your decisions. So can you talk a little bit more about how our decision-making changes when we discover our purpose and we make efforts to walk in our purpose?
Yeah, we think about your values as kind of those guardrails, right? So you're going through life and you have an experience and you're going to respond to that experience. Is that response going to be in alignment with the type of person that, you said that you want to be, with the values, the way that you want to live your life? And so I think it's very helpful in those, we react to a lot of things in life and our reactions come very fast and very quickly because it's subconscious habits, because we've reacted that way so many times. Right. Our mind's always trying to help conserve energy. So it just makes these things, a subconscious habit. It's like this thing happens, this is how you always react. And so knowing your values just puts you in more of the driver's seat to say, I don't want to just subconsciously react to my life. I want to consciously respond. And I want to respond in a way that's going to be in alignment with those values. What I'm saying is the 5 most important things to me in life. And then for just intentional decisions, should I, purchase this course? Should I work with this person? Should I invest in this thing? Should I, continue this relationship? All these decisions that we make all day long.
Yes.
When you're looking at it through the lens of your personal values, it makes that process a lot easier. There still may be, pros and cons and things you have to weigh out, but it's like, balance is one of my values. So as I take on new things, or as I, work in my business, I always have that lens of, is this giving me balance? Because that's so important in my life. It's something I didn't have in my, corporate world. And so it's very important in this business that I create balance at the very core.
That's good. And, you've mentioned on a couple of occasions, transitioning from the corporate world into Atmalogy and being the CEO and founder of Atmalogy. What were some of the challenges that you faced in shifting, right, from the corporate environment to entrepreneurship? And how did you overcome those challenges?
Well, this could take up the rest of the time we have together because the list is long. I tell people, if you ever want to know like every little limiting belief and insecurity that you have, go open your own business, because it just broadcasts it all, which is great, right? I had done so much work on myself already that I guess I was not sure that there was that much more to do, but there sure was. And going down this path really helped expose those things. But the best way I can describe it is when I was in the corporate space, there was nothing within that was in conflict with who I thought I was. Like, I thought I was a hard worker. My first job was, I started working at a bank when I was 16 in high school, and I worked all through college. I had a very strong work ethic. I was naturally a leader. I cared about developing people. I was already all of those things. There was no work I did at corporate that ever, didn't align with what I already felt about myself. So that career path seemed, it just was kind of easy, right? I would, you started at the bottom and I worked my way up, and I never felt like it was something I couldn't obtain. Like, I always had that confidence in myself that next step made sense, and I knew that I could add value, and it would challenge me, but it never seemed insurmountable. Being in business for yourself, and especially when you're going forward and you're telling people, I'm going to help coach you through some of the hardest time of your life. You have lost something or someone that's so significant to you, and I need you to trust me to take you on that journey of healing. There was a lot of imposter syndrome that I had to account for and deal with, because I wasn't seeing myself initially as a business owner. I knew what I had gone through. I knew my lived experiences, and I knew the training that I got, but I had to do a lot of work to align myself to the identity of, I am a business owner. I am a healer. I am, a transformation specialist. And those were all earned either through, a lot of investment for studying and certifications and training, or just the lived experiences that I've had. But there's just so much of that where you just, you doubt yourself when you switch career paths and you step into a space that you've never been in before. And you really have to, that identity work is so important at the beginning, because you really have to adopt and assume what you're becoming before you even see it in your reality. Right. So I had to assume the identity of somebody who was very successful, very comfortable being on camera, very comfortable asking people for money in exchange for services. I had to become that type of person before I saw the results of that work, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. And I think, that is, one thing about, discovering our purpose. It's one thing to discover it, but to be willing to step into it and, align, because that's a moment that we really have the opportunity to either be authentic, right? Because we evolve as people, right? We learn more about ourselves, and as we go forward with what we're desiring, I think, we remain who we authentically are. But it's at the moments that we discover, hey, I have this purpose, I have this desire that's within me, when we choose to, not accept it and not, pivot in that way. I think that's where, we are not being authentic, and we can deal with the imposter syndrome, like you mentioned. So I'm so glad that you chose to move forward and step into it, because you've been able to help so many people appropriately process, the loss of a loved one. And so I want to talk a little bit more about specifically some of the things that you do with Atmalogy to help people to process grief in a healthy way. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yes, I'd love to talk about this. It's my favorite topic. So I mentioned I learned a lot of different things on my journey, and I think that's how it was supposed to go, because I was supposed to learn, some of these techniques and modalities that we have for healing are okay, but they're just not going to really change, right? And that's what people want: relief, and they want the change. So the two modalities that I really lean on, the first is hypnosis. And I know a lot of people are very curious about that, especially when you talk about it in respect to grief. So hypnosis is really it's a very relaxing, easy way for us to get in touch with our subconscious mind, because our conscious mind is, always running the show, and it's just always, it kind of interfering with the subconscious mind, who, holds the keys to what we're really looking for. It's, where all our memories, all our beliefs, all our experiences are stored. And so with the work I do with clients, I utilize hypnosis in two ways to help them with the symptoms that they're experiencing. So there's a lot of insomnia that happens with grief. A lot of people, have gained weight because, they're turning, to food to help comfort. Just the overwhelm and, the stress of these events in their life. Sometimes people are turning to coping mechanisms like smoking to help them. So hypnosis is a very effective way to help get some relief for those types of things. And it also is utilized to go back and help people start to address the, unattended, repressed grief that we haven't dealt with, because there are thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of us that are walking around that have grief from our past that we have not attended to. Wow. And until we go back and do that step, every new loss we have is carrying that old unattended grief, those old wounds that have not been, addressed and processed. It all comes back up. And it starts to really manifest in our bodies and in our relationships and in our mindset in very unhealthy ways. So it's really important for us to go back to address those. So hypnosis is one of the modalities that I utilize in that way. The other process that I really lean on is called the dual process. And it's not, 5 stages. It's not, you go through this in this order and then, you're done. It's a model that helps us address 2 needs in grief. So in grief, we need to be in the grief. We need to be actively processing the grief. And we also need breaks from that. We need time away from that to start to just focus on other things in life, start to engage in life again, and start to think about a path forward. So that's very hard sometimes for people in grief to manage, oscillating between those processes on their own. So I help really create structure around that. So I'm helping people, with some structure, be in the grief, do the work. We're doing this work together. We're processing it. We're not stuffing it down. We're actually feeling everything. So you have to feel it to heal it. And then I'm really giving them that opportunity to start to figure out, who am I now? Because that's the number one comment I hear from people is, I don't know who I am anymore. And so I work with them and start that process forward.
That's good. You said a few things that I want us to, talk about a little bit more. And, as you were talking, you talked about sometimes people have grief that they didn't properly process. And so, as a result of not processing it properly, they have these things that they're carrying, which ultimately has an impact on the body. And so when you talked about that, I begin to think, there's multiple types of loss. Of course, the most significant, one of the most significant ones is when someone, passes away. But another significant loss that people experience can be divorce, right? Because you have a person who's no longer in your life, but they're still alive, right? So do you only help people with grieving the loss of a loved one who passed away, or do you sometimes unpack the grief of a divorce?
Absolutely. It's a holistic, experience. And that's one of the things I'm really pushing for is for people to start to broaden the definition of what loss includes. I have, one of the things I do in a workshop of mine is called the loss inventory, when I help people really look back at their life and start to name all the different losses that they've experienced. And everybody's always a little blown away when they do that, because they're like, I was never allowing myself to even call that grief, to even name that as a loss, because we do. So we compare so much with all of this, with loss and grief. With death, we very much compare, right? Different types of death. And well, that person, lost their child, so I can't speak about the loss of my sister. And I always say that, death it can't be compared. It shouldn't be compared. It is different. There are absolute differences with different types of loss related to death. That is absolutely true. But the truth is, the most significant loss is the one that you're experiencing. And so there's a lot, I think, that we have to, again, educate ourselves and allow ourselves to broaden the definition, because until we start giving ourselves permission to even say that is a loss that has grief associated with it, we're not going to process it. But to your point, I mean, there's just such a long list, right? Death, absolutely. There's a lot of anticipatory grief that people experience with, loved ones that they're the caretaker for. I'm experiencing anticipatory grief for my daughter who's going to be going to college. I still have a whole year, but it's already making me really present, really wanting to make sure that I'm, at every event I can be, that we're spending time together, that I'm, there for her while she's still in our house. There's grief associated with, miscarriages. There's grief for people that you never, ever met. My nephew got married last year, and his wife is just this lovely gift to us. And she has grief because she never met my sister. We all have these stories and these memories and experiences of her. And she, she's like, I feel like I have grief because I never met her. I'm like, you absolutely do. Like, that's absolutely valid. There's, grief from the childhood that you didn't experience. There's just so many different losses that we have to really give ourselves permission to understand what those are, name them, and then start to attend to them.
That's good. So you just talked about, a couple of strategies, naming them and attending to them. What are 2 or 3 other tips that you can give people to properly deal with, a loss of any sort?
Yeah. I've been talking about this a lot lately, and, I have the opportunity. Social media is it's almost like real-time market research all the time, because you see comments from people that are sharing exactly how they're feeling. And so one of the things I've been talking about a lot lately is, I hear and see people saying, I can't get over my grief. I can't get over my grief. And they're setting themselves up for failure, because grief is not something that we get over. It's something that we can eventually move forward with, but we don't get over it. And here's why. Grief is always going to be present. If you had a love and attachment for something, a person, a pet, or an experience, and you no longer have that in your physical life. That is going to result in grief. Grief is the loss from the love and the attachment. And so as long as we hold that love and attachment, which is what we want to do, we still want to hold that love and attachment in our hearts, we're going to have grief. We're going to have grief when we're in the grocery store and, we have a memory of being in the grocery store with that person. And it's going to hit us. It's going to hit us when we're driving to work and we hear a song on the radio, or when we're cooking and there's a smell that we experience. That's grief. It's all of these little moments that bring up the memory and the love that you had from that person or pet or experience. And it's that wave of emotion that's going to come over you. So when I work with people, it's not, we just kind of eliminate that getting over grief from our vocabulary, because that's just not what the experience is. The experience is to learn to hold that attachment and love and to move forward. And so the moving forward piece is really the grieving journey. And that's about how do you learn to adapt and evolve in a world that doesn't include that person, pet, or experience anymore. And that's where we really start to talk about the identity. Like who are you now? Because grief changes your identity on so many levels. So who are you now? Who do you want to be? And then how do we start to take steps forward and clear that path? Because I do believe that it's very, very possible for us to live a fulfilling and meaningful life, even if we have people that we love that are no longer here.
I agree. And you talked about moving forward and the key of moving forward. What are some of the resources that you've offered that can help viewers who are watching, and how do they obtain those resources to help them to move forward?
So my program is the 90-day Rediscover Yourself method. And that's really where I've broken out this journey. So I step side by side with my clients to revisit the past. And that's where we start. And again, attend to anything that we need to, so we can clear that once and for all, so that we can move together into the present. And the present's really where we're starting to learn the different tools and filling your toolbox so that you can manage grief on a day-to-day basis. And then we move to the future, where we're really starting to build that vision of, who am I becoming, and what does that future look like for me? So that's kind of the structure of my coaching program. I have started to create grief guides, and those are just really accessible ebooks that people can pick up that are, going to provide some immediate relief and support. My program is, 90 days, and, there's going to be a lot of support there, but I wanted to give people something just a little bit more accessible. So the first grief guide that I created, I think you have on the screen, it's called After the Service, and it's a practical support guide for those that are wanting to support others in grief. This is a huge, huge gap in our society, where you have, on one side, you have people that are in grief saying all day long, I don't feel like people care anymore. There was a lot of support right away, but then everybody else moved on with their life. But I can't move on. I'm here, and everybody else around me has forgotten about the person that I loved and cared for, or the pet. There's a lot of isolation people are feeling with guilt, and feeling guilty, and with the grief. And there's just so much that, is swirling around in all of that space. And so on the other side, you have people who want to show up and support somebody in grief, but they don't know how. They are afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. They're afraid that, they're going to make it worse. And so sometimes that results in people not saying anything. And then that's where the grievers feel very isolated, and like they're trying to navigate this on their own. So it's a two-sided issue. And this support guide, really gives people some very practical tools for the people that are saying, I don't know what to say, I don't want to make it worse. This support guide is going to help eliminate those fears and concerns. It's very practical, giving you text prompts that you can utilize, different grief check-ins that you can initiate with somebody that's in grief. Really gives you insight into what people that grieve deeply are experiencing, and what they're saying is the most important thing to them. And it's actually probably not what people think. And so very proud of this guide. I think it's really going to help start to close that gap so that people wanting to support can show up in a meaningful way and take some of that kind of confusion around, what do I say? How do I do this? On the other side of it, when I work with people that are going through the grief, one of the things that we really work on is how do they start to express what they need from other people? Because it's not just on the obligation of the supporters. We do play a role in this. The people going through the grief play a role in this because everybody does grief differently. So I can't expect that everybody that is in my world, would know what I need from grief when their neighbor may have needed something different. So I really help people get in touch with what those needs are and then how they can communicate that to their loved ones. Because when my dad passed away in September, I remember sitting on the couch and feeling like, why doesn't my fiance just come and give me a hug? I need a hug right now. Like, why isn't he just come giving me a hug? That's so insensitive. And then I'm like, no, he doesn't know that's what you need. Like, you need to share with him. So it was like a light bulb moment that went off. And I'm like, oh, right. So I went upstairs and I'm like, hey, I've been thinking about what I need from you right now. And there's 3 things. I need you to just check in with me like once a week, ask how I'm doing. Let's carve out some time that I can talk about my dad. Like that's going to be really important for me. The second thing is I need a lot of hugs. So if you just see me, we're in the kitchen, just, stop and give me a hug. That will be helpful to me. The third thing is I need, for those days when I'm having a bad day and you could see that it's really hitting me, please don't make me feel like I'm broken. Like, don't make me feel like there's something wrong with me. I don't want pity. I just want you to understand that this is what it is. And so sharing that with him changed so much of my experience because he was like, thank you. He's like, absolutely, I can do that. And he showed up in that way and it was exactly what I needed. So I say all that to hopefully illustrate that, yes, we need to really help people on supporting grief. Absolutely a huge gap. And we as the grievers also need to be able to articulate our needs because it's a two-sided issue.
I agree. So I know that people are probably wondering, how do I get this guide? How do I sign up for your 90-day program? So what steps would they need to take?
So the guide is on the link that you have up in my stand store. And in terms of us, working together, my website's the best place for people to fill out that contact form and just shoot a quick note and I'll get in contact to just have a call. I mean, that's how I start all of, my relationships with clients is we just get on a call because I need to really make sure that, what I offer is appropriate. I've had people that have reached out 2 weeks after a loss and I've told them, down the road, us working together, I think makes perfect sense. But right now, you just need to be. You just need to be, and you just need to allow, all of what you're feeling to happen. And I can provide some resources, to help them through that. But, it really does matter, what point people are at. And then there's, there's some people who it's just been a month and they're ready. And I can tell that when we have that conversation. So the call, is just, it's a free call that, people can utilize to gauge where they're at. And if, my services are exactly the next step that they need.
Great. And I know you said that the initial, it's, preferred that you have a phone call, but if people want to connect with you, what ways can they connect?
Yep. So my TikTok is on the screen too. And that's where I'm spending a lot of my time. I'm also going to be over on LinkedIn as well, but I'm really enjoying the community on TikTok and being able to offer, just some valuable resources and information through that channel that people are finding very helpful.
Fantastic. Well, is there anything else that you want to add, Karen, before we conclude today?
Just really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about this. I guess to everybody listening, I would say invite grief into your life. It is the one thing that nobody is escaping, unfortunately. And honestly, as I've gotten older, the losses just come more frequently. And so the sooner that we can embrace this process to understand grief, to understand what it's trying to teach us, what I can learn from it, just redefining our relationship with loss, the more resilience we're going to have and the more skill set we're going to have around this, so that, each loss is going to be very difficult, but it does allow us to manage it with a little bit more ease. So I guess that's what I would say. Just, open your heart and your mind to grief, and know that, we're all kind of getting better at this together.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Karen. It has been certainly a pleasure to have you on Purpose today. Thank you to all of our viewers who are watching. And Karen, I'll be back with you here in a moment. And for our guest, thank you again for tuning in. And we appreciate you taking the time to watch another episode of Purpose Today. I do encourage you, if you have a desire to make a pivot professionally. Karen talked about how she was in the corporate world prior to launching Atmalogy. So we do encourage you to contact us. Now, if this show has been a blessing to you, I invite you to share the link to our YouTube channel, Purpose Today, with those who you know. So thank you so much for tuning in. I do encourage you to stay tuned for another power-packed episode of Purpose Today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I encourage you to live your purpose today and every day. Until next time.